Welcome to this seminar organized by Sida and SIANI, focusing on SDG 2, zero hunger, but also adding in a changing climate. This whole morning, I've had the opportunity, together with one of our keynote speakers also, to spend listening to the launch of the Agenda 2030 at Folkets Hus. About 600 people and a lot of people watching, and Sida's Director General was there, and a lot of ministers, the Prime Minister kickstart the whole event, and we were represented civil society, and we had a very, very interesting and nice discussion. And a lot of issues that came up was also about elephants in the room, for instance, sustainable consumption and production. And food is at the center of all this, isn't it? In so many different dimensions and perspectives. So it's going to be really interesting to have a full afternoon focusing on zero hunger. How can we reach that in a changing climate, but also while preserving a planet? So my name is Johan Kylenstierna. I'm the Executive Director of Stockholm Environment Institute. We are hosting SIANI, among other things, but we also have a lot of collaboration with Sida in many different dimensions. But today I'm not allowed to speak very much, apart from being a moderator and directing our speakers. It feels a bit bad, I must say. You know, it's tempting. But I had my 5 minutes on the panel this morning. Okay, that's, so it's a good start anyway. But I would like to hand over to Marie Ottosson, who is Assistant Director General here at Sida. Why don't you kickstart us into this seminar, and then we move forward with the keynote speakers. So please, Marie, give her an applaud. So.
Thank you very much, Johan, and I must admit that I am very jealous that you were there this morning, but I know that it was broadcasted, so for those of us who were not invited, we can see it later on when we have the time for that. I would also start out by saying you're all most welcome to Sida and to today's development talk, the first development talk of 2016. It is, as Johan said, a very important topic, zero hunger in a changing climate. And I know that all our speakers will discuss this from different angles. But since I have been given now 10 minutes to give some introductory remark, I will try to use my time wisely. And I would like to start with the meeting, of course, in Paris, which I think was a very successful, not only meeting, but the outcome of the meeting and the agreement that we now have in place. To see that the world could actually come together when it was needed the most is extremely encouraging. And to see that almost all countries now in the world have adopted this agreement, I think that is great news. I know that everyone here knows a lot of the details of the agreements, and you don't have to worry. I'm not going to go to the agreement in details, but I still would like to say that we all know that the world could agree on not exceeding a 2 degrees increase in the average temperature is really good news. But of course, we should aim for being even better than that and try not to exceed the 1.5 degree. Another part of the agreement was, of course, food security, which I think is known to everyone here, but maybe not to the public in general. And if I would just like to read out what it says in the agreement about food security. The parties to this agreement recognize the fundamental priority of safeguarding food security and ending hunger at the particular vulnerabilities of food protection systems to the adverse impacts of climate change. And of course, we don't have the answers to that if that would be, because then we wouldn't be here, but that is why we are here today to discuss food security. And as you also know, food security is also the SDG 2, which is slightly shorter than the agreement: end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. And as I said, this is not an easy task, but having said that, it is something that we now have to address, all of us, and to do this in a proper way. And this development talk is one good starting point for that. You also know that the population of the world is growing, and it's growing fast. We are estimated to have 9.3 billion people by 2050. And of course, this is not only due to an increasing birth rate, it is also due to a very positive fact in itself that we have been able to decrease the under 5 mortality rate. But the third factor is also that we do expect the general life expectancy to increase. But this is not the only change in the demand for food, and we will discuss other aspects today as well. If we look at food security, another aspect of it is, of course, the quality of the food produced. And we can see now that with an increase in the global growing middle class, we also see that they will also have a rising income. And as a result, they will also change in the food consumption. That is now already taking place. And the scientists call this a nutrition transition. And what we see now is the production of this kind of new food that also demands more agricultural land, it demands more energy than the traditional diet. So then we have two sides of this. On one side, we want to be able to feed the world's growing population that we know will increase in the next coming decades. At the same time, we have these challenges that are so important to us. We want to strive to decrease our carbon dioxide emissions. We want to stop the degradation of land. We want to preserve the ecosystem services. And we want to protect the biological diversity. So how do we do this? And that is, of course, what we, as I said in the beginning, we will discuss that later on today. But if we look at the agriculture sector, that is not only key when it comes to growing our own food. It is also a large emitter of greenhouse gases. And the biggest source of emission actually comes from enteric fermentation, which is when methane is produced by livestock during digestion. And we have a UN report which was released in 2014, which estimated that enteric fermentation made up to 40% of greenhouse gas emissions from the agriculture sector. Furthermore, if we look at the use of synthetic fertilizers and manure, and biological process in rice paddies generating methane and burning of savannas in the creation of new and fertile agricultural land, it makes up to 90% of all emissions from that sector. There might be slight changes in the figures and numbers, but it is clear that both agriculture and the livestock sector is estimated to be the second biggest emitter of greenhouse gases after the energy sector. So we need to take lessons from this, and it is clear that business as usual is not the step forward. I would also like to take this opportunity to recognize a few regional issues when it comes to the production of food around the world. When we talk about food security, we often say that we need to have sustainable intensification of agricultural land, but we also need to lessen the pressure on some land, which is now misused, and we need to focus to restore it instead of primarily increasing the production. So looking at the world today, we see a range of different challenges when it comes to land use practices. And we also find land with the potential for producing more on the lot of land, but we also find a great amount of the agriculture and forest land that is degraded because of over and misuse of natural resources. So it is clear that an intensification of that land without restoring it is not advisable. And I'm not afraid, because I don't think I need to convince anyone here about that. We also see now that there are a number of different water crises around the world. Due to some time restrictions, I will not go into the details. But it is clear that if water insecurity remains like this in the future, it is clear that the farmers that are now affected by this, they need to change their way of, they need to change their agriculture production compared to how it is carried out today. And we have many other challenges when it comes to limit climate change in terms of mitigation and limiting carbon dioxide emissions, both in large-scale deforestation and the degradation of the ecosystem services that comes with it. I have now spoken roughly about some water insecurity and the degraded agricultural land and deforestation. And as I said, there are a few examples of the issues that we need to tackle, both to ensure that we food security as well as limiting climate change. And we can see and we know that the solutions to different regions and different countries, they are different because they are, of course, facing different problems. Just to say a few words about what Sida and Sweden are committed to and what we have done, because not everyone here is familiar with that. If we go back to the COP21 and the meeting, Sweden committed to a range of global initiatives meant to work towards rehabilitating large areas of forest and agricultural land around the world. Sweden is very proud also that we have signed the New York Declaration of Forest, which brings together the government, brings together companies, it brings civil society, and we are hoping that that will reduce national forests around the world by 2020. And succeeding with this is not only going to help preserve the biological diversity and the ecosystems services, but it will also reduce the carbon pollution with 4.5 to 8.8 billion tons every year, which is quite significant. And just to share some statistic with you, this is actually the same and the equivalent of the total amount of emission now produced by the US. So having said that, I think you all understand that this is huge tons that could be spent more wisely. Another initiative that Sweden has joined is the 4 per Mill initiative. This initiative is aiming at increasing the soil carbon stock, as a means also to improve soil fertility for better climate, food production and healthy soils. And we also see now that there is an increased production of food, and that also follows an increased demand for land. And therefore, the issue of who has the right to control land is also an issue which is very close to the work that Sida is doing. We are recognizing both the need to ensure land rights for people living and using their land. So therefore, I would just like to acknowledge as one of Sida's support to the International Land and Forest Tenure Facility, which is a global facility focusing on establishing both local and community land rights for people living in or in connection to forests. And the last thing I would like to mention when it comes to the initiative is that Sida recently announced our support to the new research program, Agriculture for Food Security Post-2015, translating science into policy and development. And this is a collaboration between researchers in Sweden and colleagues in development countries. If you have more questions about this, I will not have the time to go into that right now, but please feel free to ask us any questions during the break, and we have lots of Sida colleagues who will be able to answer those questions. So food security is very complex, it is very important, and therefore the need of as many actors at different levels is really important if we're going to succeed. So with that, I would like to wrap up because we want to stick to the timetable and we want to listen to the experience, ideas that we have from our invited speakers, but also, of course, from the audience and everyone here. So with that, I would like to say thank you.
Yes.